Hello, so strong nation. Joe Simons like diamonds, got Luke Simons like diamonds, got Wyatt Parcell like Marcel. What's up, guys?
Going ready to talk leaders.
Leaders. We're talking about leader lines, in particular, inshore saltwater leader line mistakes. So if you're a bass guy or gal and used to catching ditch pickles on 60-pound braid, this is probably not for you. Go to a different room. This is going to be for the guys and gals that want to catch redfish, speckled trout, snook, flounder, and maybe you're confused. We talked about having the title this kind of beginner's guide to leaders, but there's a lot of experienced people making some of these same mistakes. We're talking about too long of leader, too short a leader, too heavy, too small, casting it through the guides. I mean, there's a lot of things that we see people do on our boats that we're fishing with or out in the piers and jetties. And you're like, I wish I could kind of help them out with this. Talk about some of the best knots, and really just having a strategy on what size leader line to go to and how long it should be. Because we're seeing that question. It came up again this weekend in the insider community. So who wants to kick this thing off with some mistakes you're seeing?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. I just think the biggest mistake that I just see, whether it's just questions we get in or just from seeing people fishing on piers and on the beach, is just not specifically choosing the right leader for the application. For example, like going after sea trout and redfish with like in a bay with a 40-pound leader is total overkill, and it will not help you catch any more fish than if you're using like a 20 or even maybe a 15-pound leader, and it'll 100% decrease the amount of strikes you get because that's just so thick. Even if they can't see it, they'll at least be able to feel it. So I think
tell everyone why, because there's some people saying, well, why not?
Yeah, because it's just thick, right? Because fish, even if fish in murky water, the fish not only can see the leader line, they also can feel it. Even if you're using fluoro, I know the marketing says it's invisible. It's not invisible underwater, I promise you. But even if it was, they could still feel that material, right? They can feel like however long your leader is. Say you have a 2-foot leader. They can feel something that's 24 inches moving through the water, even if they can't see it at all. And if it's a fish that's under 24 inches, they're probably not going to like the feel of something bigger in their presence. And so just going smaller will absolutely help increase strikes. And just knowing that redfish and sea trout, even flounder, they're really not good about chewing through leaders at all. So you can really get away with lighter leaders. And when I say it all, relative to snook are really good about chewing through leaders. So for snook fishing, like at least 25-pound leader, if not 30. But for the redfish and trout, like when I'm just going after those, 20 max for the bays. Obviously bump it up if you're going after the giant redfish in like a pass or inlet, but just for the normal bay fishing, this matching the leader line, specifically going down to like 20 or so, is more than enough in most instances.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we've been with anglers before, and they have like literally one option in their tackle bag for leader line, and that's horrible. I mean, it's just like having one jig head. Whereas like you go with Luke, and I mean, he's got all these different options, right? You got 20, 25, 30, 35, 44, all the way up to 60, depending on the application. Very, very important to have the right thing, because you will decrease your chances of catching fish if you go too big. And so many beginners do that. We did that. So many beginners do that, right? And remember that guy you ran into at the boat ramp, right? He's like, man, I can't catch anything. We had like an absolute killer day. And like, let me see your rig. Guess what he's using? 20-pound braid and 40-pound leader. He's like, and this is out in the middle of an open flat. Like, what are you trying to catch? Sharks? And obviously he was going for redfish and trout. And just that was a massive reason why he wasn't having success. That's a great one. What do you got? Why? What do you think is kind of one of the bigger ones that you see?
Yeah, I kind of want to piggyback on top of that subject. Definitely choosing for the right scenario, but like even outside of a context in like a specific species you're targeting. So Luke made a great point on like not using super heavy leader for trout. They can feel stuff really well with they got great lateral lines. They can feel everything going on around them, but also the type of fishing that you're doing. So if you're fishing, like you said, those open flats, you don't need that really heavy leader. But say you're targeting redfish on a jetty where there's a lot of rocks, or you're fishing around a dock, something like that. Even, small specimens of both of those species fishing around a dock, if they wrap you on a piling, very good chance they could break you off because there's barnacles and things like that. So if I am dock fishing, I will bump it up, 5-10 pounds. Normally, like, just like Luke, I don't go over 20 oftentimes when I'm targeting redfish and trout or flounder on those docks. But if I try to fish under, some of these older docks I know that have fish on them, I'm going to bump it up to that 25, maybe up to 30, because it's very possible for a red to go on one of those classic runs they got, and they'll wrap you in between 3-4 pilings. So and it's crazy how much, abrasion resistance you get off of 5-10 pounds of extra added strength. When I fish the jetties over in Port Aransas, I'm bumping up to 45, 55 pound leader. And I'll a lot of times use mono as well. I'm sure we'll talk about this, but Luke's done some great tests on abrasion resistance. Anytime I'm fishing around structure, I'm always going to use a monofilament leader. The much higher resistance in terms of what that's going to rub on structure and do versus fluoro. So I would say number one, like we talked about, definitely using the right leader for the right scenario. Probably the next thing that we should talk about is basically not casting that knot that connects your braid to your leader line through the guides. When I'm fishing artificial lures, you're making quite a few hundred casts per day. If you don't measure that leader out properly, and you're not aware of where that knot is when you go to cast, if you have it, behind the first guide or two, that knot is knocking against every single one of those guides every time that you cast. And that's going to significantly weaken the connection. So the leader's not actually what's going to break. Your knot's going to fail because you've sat there and abrased the knot a bunch. Most times when I'm artificial fishing, we'll talk about the lengths and everything. I never cast that guide through the knots at all. I know a lot of guys that tie a long enough leader where it sits in their spool and it goes through every single guide. And I've seen quite a few of them break off when we go fishing for reds and they go off on those runs. The only exception to this is, I would say, offshore fishing, which we probably won't do a whole lot of talking about today, but some folks that might have gone out trolling might think of leader knots that are 10, 15 yards back in the spool. But that's because when you feed out that line, it's not like casting a couple hundred times in a flats fishing scenario. So yes, there are exceptions to casting through the guides, but for artificial lures, for redfish, trout, flounder, snook, I will never cast that knot through the guides ever.
What is your average leader length?
So I generally base it off the rod that I'm fishing with. So just to get proper leverage on the cast, I would say most times I'm going to fish somewhere between 2 foot and 2.5 feet. That's generally what I've got. So that lure is going to hang, if you got a 7-6 foot rod, it's going to hang probably down to like the fourth or fifth guide. You just don't want to have it too long to where you're not able to get a really good cast. And if it's too short, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to get the actual action of the rod to load back properly. Luke, I don't know how long of a leader are you tying on most of your rigs?
Yeah, I did a video on it. So I went ahead and measured it, and it depends on lures or live bait. So the more frequent I cast, like what Wyatt said, it's very smart to not cast the knots through guides on a repetitive basis, because it'll weaken the knots, as Wyatt said. It's actually bad for the rod too, because just the vibration of the knot hitting every time is not good. But for lures, I start with 26 inches is about my average, and I'll keep using it until it gets down to about 18. That's generally when I'll switch and repeat. That's for casting. But if I know I'm just like skip casting or docks or skip casting under mangroves, we're having a little bit shorter line out from the rod tip, it just helps with accuracy. Then I'll start at like 20 to 22, and then still, change it out at like the 18-ish length. Because over time, right, another mistake is after catching a snook, or really anything for that matter, is not checking the leader for abrasion, because the very next cast could be the fish of a lifetime. And if you just caught, say, a ladyfish that just chafed up some of the line, now you have a 40-inch snook, which you probably would have caught if the leader was in pristine condition. But even that little ladyfish nick could be enough to compromise it. So regardless of what you're doing, make sure that you're checking the leader. And if there's any nicks at all, retie, right? Go ahead, retie. And then as soon as it gets to that point, right, say 16 to 18 inches plus or minus, then just go ahead and put a new leader on. So yeah, 26 for lures for me. And then when I'm using live bait, where I'm not doing as much casting, then I'll go up to like maybe 30. But again, plus or minus, there's not like an exact science. A lot of it's kind of feel. Like after a while, when you're casting the longer length from your rod tip, when you're casting that, it feels really weird at first. Like if you're used to doing a foot and then you go up to say 26 inches, it feels weird. It feels awkward. And it's kind of like doing like even like a golf swing, or if you go out and change your golf swing up a little bit, it feels really weird. But over time, you'll feel that it's more comfortable, and you'll find that it's more effective. So I think this will be an example of that, where just force yourself to do it, say 26 inches, get used to it. Over time, you'll be just as accurate as you were with 12. And then just practice makes perfect.
Yep, that's good. What not are you, because that was another question that I saw came up here recently. Obviously FG knot is a popular one, not everyone, pun intended here, is as comfortable with it. I think for whatever reason, it's kind of like the golf swing. Tying an FG knot, if you've been used to doing a uni, it is a little bit more cumbersome. Like, man, it feels like it takes forever. But for me, I can tie it faster than I can a double uni knot now, or close to about the same, because I'm just so used to doing FG now. I haven't done double unis as much since I switched. What do you guys use?
FG.
Yeah, there's nothing that beats the FG. There's just been so many tests done on it. I can only think of one time that I tie a double uni, and it's when I don't have my wade fishing belt on. I have nowhere to put my rod to post up and actually hold the line with my teeth. If I'd listen to Luke and do the pinky method, I'd be better off. But the only time I'll tie a double uni is when I don't have a way to secure that line and do the FG. But I do that 95% of the time.
And a lot of people do struggle with the FG though. And if that's the case, I would say the second one, because I've done a ton of knot tests. And I would say the second recommendation I would have is the Crazy Alberto knot. It's still pretty easy to tie. You don't have to have tension, or you don't have to do anything crazy. And it is stronger than the double uni, but it's specific. It's another one that's for braid to leader, but it's thinner than double uni is why I mentioned it's thinner and a little bit stronger. But the FG is like a little bit more than 20% stronger than all those. So FG's awesome. Just take some practice as well.
Yep. And Crazy Alberto just joined the Insider Club. You guys see that?
That's awesome.
Yeah, Alberto Knee, the guy who created that knot. Quite the angler. He's got world records and all kinds of amazing stories from fishing around the world. And yeah, he just joined the Salt String Insider Club. So yes, even really experienced people join and get value. It was really cool to see him on there. What else? Let's talk about like store-bought leader, right? You've seen some of these leaders and rigs, and they've got everything from bright beads on there to weights to all kinds of terminal tackle and equipment and swivels, snaps. What do you guys think about pre-bought leader rigs? Or should I even ask? I can see it on your faces. Yeah, you're disgusted.
Don't do it. Because to me, it's so easy to do. Like once you just learn a couple knots, like why trust that? Because in many cases they don't even label what line it is, so you really are not really sure exactly what you're using. And if you do it yourself, it's in many cases, especially if you actually take some time to learn some of the knots that are proven to work better than others, you'll actually have better connection as well. So like even a line to line knot, I've done a lot of line to line knots, specifically the FG knot. It is stronger than any line to swivel knot I've ever done. So you're literally better off doing a line like a 10-pound braid to a 20-pound leader with the FG knot than putting a swivel in between. I used to always think that swivels added strength. That is not the case at all. Because what happens physically is that the lines, the fact that there's a little bit of give in them as you do a line to line connection, that little bit of give actually increases the strength of the knot. Whereas when it's touching the metal, there's no give at all, and the metal doesn't really help the knot at all. So again, something I always thought for years that swivels added strength, and that is something that was totally disproven once I started actually testing knots.
Yeah, I agree with Luke. I'm not a big fan of store-bought leaders. When I was younger, didn't know how to tie the knots. I bought them all the time. Bought those big heavy metal cable ones when I went surf fishing. If you've done any kind of beach fishing, good chance you've used those. But I found when I started tying my own rigs myself, I started catching a lot more fish. I also had more control, like especially if you're fishing for pompano. They're a very visual feeder. Sometimes some colors they'll key in on, different things like that. So being able to tie your own leaders and tie your own rigs gives you a lot more versatility. You know, if they're keying in on the orange floats or the green floats, and, you know, you tie those rigs yourself, you can then switch to whatever the fish are kind of on that day. So especially with surf rigs, I would recommend just tying them yourself. It's a lot cheaper too. You know, some of those rigs can go up 10, 15 bucks. I've seen shark rigs, you know, the really heavy stuff that, you know, once you start getting into the crimping, maybe it does, if you don't have crimping tools, could save you money if you're buying 1 or 2 rigs. But some of those rigs go for $30, $40, you know, for a single strand of a rig. So yeah, there's a lot of different options out there, but for most of what we're doing, you know, light tackle surf fishing or inshore fishing with live bait, I just recommend tie your own rigs.
And that also means stay away from these steel leaders, right? Let's talk about that, because that's also something you see sometimes. You're like, what are you guys fishing for? Sharks? Barracuda? No.
Yeah, I see people snook fishing or going after redfish with cables, right? The store-bought cables. That is a guaranteed way to significantly decrease the amount of fish you catch, even if you're soaking live bait on the bottom, right? That it's just something they can see and feel better. But if you're using lures, especially, that is a guaranteed. You probably won't catch anything but catfish and ladyfish, just because it's just so visible, right? It is literally a steel cable going through the water, and that is not going to get anywhere near the performance as like just a thin mono or fluoro leader. It's just wanting to be a comparison.
What about some of the anglers, and let's just say some dirtier water areas, have said, oh, it's so dirty, I don't even need a leader, I just go straight braid to whatever, hook, jig head, etc. What do you guys think?
I don't think that's a great idea, because you think about a redfish's mouth, or if you happen to be fishing dirty water in an area that there is snook, those fish are going to hit that braid and their mouth is going to start, you know, abrasing it, basically redfish crushers or snook lips, whatever it may be. That's going to tear that braid up and shred it immediately. If they're going on long runs and that line is rubbing in the corner of their mouth, you're not going to have that fish on for long. Maybe for some of the guys that fish with the 60-pound braid on their bait casters, but if you're using spinning gear, your chances are it's very light tackle braid. I would say you definitely need to have a leader, even if you're fishing in dirty water. Another consideration is just those fish are now more used to, if it's consistently dirty water, say in the Carolinas, upper parts of Florida, Georgia, all those areas, if it's consistently dirty water, those fish are much more used to feeling what's going on around them. So you actually have more of a disadvantage if you are using heavier diameter line, or you're using that braid, just because that thinner diameter leader is going to put out less vibration in the water. It's like put your hand on a wood plank and you start banging on that wood plank. That's what the fish can feel in the water. Their lateral lines pick up those vibrations. So the heavier diameter line you have, the more chance they're going to feel those vibrations moving. So I would say in dirtier water, it's almost more important. I would downsize sometimes to 12-pound leader in the wintertime when fishing for trout in the Carolinas. I feel like those fish definitely can pick up on it, dirty and clear water.
Yeah, and I did a kind of an accidental test. I was just kind of done out of pure laziness. One day we're out catching pinfish with a hook and line rig where you just have like the little small hooks and some little pieces of gulp. And we had a couple rods going. One had a 20-pound mono leader, like the normal setups that I use for inshore fishing. And the other one, I think a mackerel came in and sliced it up, but lost the leader. So I just didn't feel like tying on the leader. We're just catching pinfish. So I just did the same rig, but with braid. So a 10-pound braid, it was green, like the normal moss green braid, and a 20-pound mono leader, just thinking that the pinfish wouldn't care because they're obviously not the brightest fish. But the leader one with a 20-pound leader totally caught way more pinfish than the 10-pound braid. So even dumb little pinfish will side to the mono leader versus the straight braid. So the fact that pinfish made that decision to go more for the leader, now I totally think that the bigger fish do as well. And as Wyatt said, you had the added advantage of more abrasion resistance when you do the mono versus the braid.
Pretty good. So big elephant in the room here. Mono versus fluoro. I see that. Oh, well, Luke's using mono, and I saw Captain Peter Deeks is using fluoro. And that's one of many examples. What's the skinny? Mono versus fluoro versus like the leader only fluoro that's 10 times more expensive than a strand of mono.
I think that fluoro is the most overhyped thing in fishing. I literally was so bought into it when tournament fishing. I was always getting the expensive spools of
Fool. He
fools.
said fool.
I was getting the expense. I was a fool and getting just, if I wasn't using the the $20 per 25-yard spool, then I wasn't, like, in my mind I was just cheating myself and I wasn't going to catch anything. And literally for like 2 years after we started Salt Strong, I started doing the abrasion test and saw that the regular mono was totally outperforming the really expensive fluoro on abrasion resistance. And that was something that was claimed that, oh my gosh, like I did that test just to prove how much better fluoro was. Like, literally, that my total assumption was fluoro was going to crush it. It wouldn't be even close. And I was so shocked when mono it wasn't even close. Mono absolutely crushed it. Even when factoring in the diameter, usually like a 20-pound fluoro is almost always going to be thinner than a 20-pound mono. So even testing a 20-pound fluoro against a 20-pound mono against a 25-pound fluoro, the mono wins. And even the mono is a little bit thinner, the mono still wins. So I literally went like 2 years with kind of going back and forth, and I couldn't tell a difference on fish caught over many days of trying it. So like literally last year, I've been using just mono, like just regular mono, whether it's Andy. I've been using Berkeley Big Game too. And I feel like I've been catching more good fish this year than I have any years prior. So it's definitely not required, is all I can say for certain. Whereas for many years, I was like, oh my gosh, if I'm not using fluoro, I'm not catching anything. So you definitely do not have to spend the extra money for fluoros, long story short.
It's interesting if you go to YouTube or Google and type in, mono versus fluoro, like experiments or contests, your videos come up at the top. Like, we have a lot from Salt Strong that we've done over the years, and you have some people just giving their opinion. But it's really odd that none of these big companies, at least that I've seen, if we're wrong, please shoot us some video footage, but they all seem to have the marketing claims that, oh, it's stronger and more abrasion resistant, and fish can't see it, which is a joke. But like, none of them back it up with like any science or like videos. Like, if it were my company, like we've done with all of our stuff that we sell, like we test this stuff out and we get on video and fish with it and show it side by side. I would be in a lab, like doing legit abrasion tests and even what, looking at different lines under different lights at different depths. I mean, all that stuff you can do in a laboratory. And it is odd that none of that stuff's ever been published. So which makes me kind of like you, Luke, wonder, like, all right, is this just all big marketing hype or what, that none of it's ever been documented? I always thought that was odd. And there is, we got mono, and then you have fluoro just in general. You can buy big spools of fluoro. And then what Luke's talking about, if you're not familiar with this, is they have smaller spools of like 25 yards where it's fluoro leader line. Like, it's supposed to be even better than normal fluoro. I think it's literally the same thing that is on, 100-yard, and you have to pay more. You pay a multiple to have that. And it was very odd. And I did the same thing. I still own some of that super expensive Seagar, and not to say it doesn't work. It works fine. I just, to your point, you don't need it, clearly. Wyatt's sitting there chomping at the bit. What do you think, dude?
So we've talked about this subject a lot, and over the years, I was a diehard fluoro, and after a while, Luke convinced me to start trying mono, see if I saw a difference, and I really didn't see much of a difference. Nothing quantifiable. Granted, I didn't have an Excel spreadsheet out that was telling me, how many fish I caught on fluoro, how many caught on mono. The one thing that will make me choose fluoro over mono is that line diameter. Now, Luke talked about it, and obviously you could just downsize with mono, but if there is that unspoken, we don't know whether it's, less visible to fish, the refraction versus reflection, there is nothing quantifiable about it. And if I've been having a hard time catching fish, or I've got fish that are turning me down, just the superstitious person in me sometimes will tie it on. Would I recommend that to somebody if they're telling me they're not catching fish, they can't figure out why? That would be the very last thing I would recommend to them. There's so many other things to fix before switching from mono to fluoro. Again, until I see something quantifiable, I'll just interchange between the two. It's really about what's in stock or what's on sale. That's the biggest thing for me. And I have a ton of spools of fluoro still laying around. I'll use them. And especially on tournament day, if I don't want to leave anything to chance, but I've also caught fish on mono on tournament days. So it's one of those things where I am sitting on the fence for it. If I find that I do need a thinner line diameter, I see fish spooking off as I'm, twitching the lure, that tells me, if that lure is not even near them, the very good chance they felt it. So I do need something thinner diameter. I could bump down the full line size if I'm fishing for reds and I need that, I still need to keep similar line tests. Likely what I'll do is just downsize my fluoro. But I don't think it's that big of a talking point, but it is something that gets proportionately blown out of the water in terms of this big leader debate that we have. Yeah.
Well, there's more money in the fluoro. I mean, we sell both at fishstrong.com. We'll gladly take your money if you want to buy the expensive fluoro. We got it. And we have people that buy it. We have team members who buy it. Wyatt's raising his hand. He buys it. Luke and I, for the most part, are buying the Annie. We have lots of Annie. We make less money on mono, which to me, I think that's why I believe it's kind of part of this whole hype, and it's more of a marketing thing. And I mean, the manufacturers would much rather sell fluoro because there's a lot more money in it than the old school mono. But still today, we did we did a podcast on the IGFA world records, and there's more world records on the saltwater side caught using old school Andy mono than anything else out there. And part of it, you could say, if you were playing devil's advocate, is that, fluoro hasn't been around as long and Andy mono's been around for 60 years, but still, it worked then, it works now. That's what I usually buy from our Fish Strong site. We get the same insider discount everyone else, and that's what you'll see. And I know Luke, he buys it, a lot of it. He makes Christmas ornaments out of it and stuff and everything, but it's so cheap. You don't have to worry about it as much.
And the reality too is that the difference between their fluoro is a mono line. So it's like you're almost arguing mono versus mono. Fluoro is just a little bit denser than like the traditional mono. So they're both made of nylon. So it's not like a fluoro and mono is like so different. They're both nylon lines. One is just a little bit denser than the other. And so long story short, you don't have to buy the expensive fluoro. I personally haven't used it in quite a while, and I've been doing just fine. And just really about the line diameter. White nailed it. Where if the fish are really finicky, instead of feel like you have to go to a fluoro, just get like go down to a 15-pound mono. So on abrasion test, 15-pound mono beat 20-pound fluoro, right? So it's when you equate the diameters, that's usually going to be the strike or no strike thing versus the fluoro versus mono, because the science behind it is the fluoro supposedly has less refraction of light because it's a little bit denser. But when you're talking such a thin line, the reflection of the outer material is probably what fish can or can't see. And there's been no studies that shows that fluoro has better reflective quantity or qualities on the exterior than regular mono. So in case you want to get nerdy, that's kind of the next level. And we have some posts on it too. Like if you Google it, we have some posts that goes down into detail. And as Joe said, some of these videos have over 100,000 views, and so far, none of the major companies have kind of contested our experiment. So we actually filmed the entire experiment just so that if we're not doing something right, like we want to know, right? We're not trying to sell one or the other.
Yeah, we don't have a horse in the game. We care less.
We just trying to make sure that everybody's informed. Yeah. And because I was literally mad. Like I can't tell you how much money I spent on fluoro over the years. So I was literally just really mad when I saw with my own eyes that the less expensive line was actually proven to be better than the more expensive line for abrasion. Like I'm going after snook a lot, so the abrasion is my number one concern, and so I was like literally mad. But I think we've hammered this subject.
Yeah, let's talk about, this is less of a mistake and more of an improvement. The dirty Deeks, because that was something we did here kind of recently, and that's a different type of leader. Talk about how you do that, what knots you're using, and we'll obviously put a link. You can see the whole thing, but give us a kind of a 30,000 foot view on what it is, Luke.
Yeah, so the Dirty Deeks, it's almost like taking a fly fishing setup to traditional tackle. So it's basically a way to have a thin overall leader line, right? The thinner the overall leader, so you have a 26-inch leader, the thinner that is, the more likely the fish is not going to feel it. But the thinner it is, the more likely the fish is going to wear through it when you're fighting it. So the concept is to have a really thin, say the whole thing is 26 inches. So you have 20 inches of thin material, right? Thinner than you would normally use.
Like what, like 20 on average?
So like if I'm going after snook, I'll use, and I need a 30-pound business end to withstand the snook's abrasion. I will go to a 20-pound or maybe even 15-pound top section of the leader, right? 20 inches of say 15 to 20 pound. And then right before the lure, right, last 6 to 8 inches, then I'll tie on a thicker strand, right? That business end, this is where the abrasion is most important, right there, right next to the fish's mouth, for their mouth in particular, their teeth rubbing up against the lure. And when they're digging down at the bottom, trying to just shake that lure out, they could be hitting oysters, shells, all sorts of stuff. So it's that business end, that very last tippet, if you will, that's where you really need the beef. And so I would go from like a 15 to 20 to a 30 at the end. But now, like this in particular, I was using a sight fish and redfish. I went down to a 12-pound top section of the leader, and then a 15-pound little business section. So it doesn't have to be like a ×2 or ×3. It could just be a small little increase. But it's pretty smart, and I've been doing it for I guess like 6 months or so, kind of going back and forth, and so far I've seen some good results. It's hard to quantify it because it is a slight adjustment, but so far so good.
But Deeks uses it. It's got to be good. What knot do you tie to bring those two leader lines together?
So yeah, blood knot. So the good, really good mono to mono or fluoro to fluoro, whatever you want to use. We'll say nylon to nylon because that's all applies. Is a blood knot. So I do 4 turns with the thicker line and then 5 turns with the thinner line and cinch it down. And it's a really nice, for those watching, it's a really nice streamlined knot. A lot of fly fishermen use it for doing their tippets that change sizes, and easy to tie, and really strong. So far so good.
Yeah, and if you're using fluoro to fluoro, the fool's knot is a great one to use.
Yeah, we call it the wasting money knot.
Oh, whammy. Why even tie a knot? Just throw it away. Sorry, we had to have fun there. But yeah, please go to fishrun.com and buy all your expensive fluoro there. Insider save 20% off. What else, guys? What other mistakes on the leader?
Probably I have one written down, and we kind of covered it, but I see folks, they'll be fishing all day, they're changing so many lures, and they get down to a piece of leader that's like that 6 inches that we saw on the end of the Dirty Deeks, but it's like that's what's connected to their braid. Like Luke said, the chopping block is usually about 16 or 15 or 16 for me. Once it starts getting smaller than that, I feel like it's almost like there's not even point in having a leader other than the initial abrasion resistance right at the mouth. But I just think that I see a lot of folks that will tie on leader, but they don't want to retie, so they'll just get lazy and let it shrink. I normally know once I cut and retie, or I break off and retie like 3 times, it's about time to change. 3-4 times, it's about time to change my lures. And I will put in an initial buffer just to help myself out. I know Luke said he starts with like 26. I'll have somewhere, about what I want my leader to be, and then I'll pull off a couple extra inches for the FG and the initial tie for my first lure. So that way I end up with exactly what I want to have with the lure already tied on. So you basically have an extra change or 2 in there for your lure. So just help yourself out and pull a little extra out when you do tie your initial leader on. That's one thing I would recommend. Give yourself a buffer, basically.
Yeah, and I'll add one more too, and it's just to test your knots, right? Because I've done a lot of knot tests, as I mentioned, and different lines do handle differently to different knots. And so instead of taking our word for it or anybody else's you see on the internet, just test out. Get whatever lines you're using and tie whatever knots you think are best, and then maybe tie a couple other ones that you've heard are good, tied to the same strand. You don't have to have an expensive knot tester. I literally started doing it by getting my leader line, doing a line to line, and then cutting the braid and doing another line to line on that same leader on the other side, tying it off to a doorknob or to a fence, and literally pulling on the other end until the weakest link broke. And so you don't know exactly the breaking point, but at least know where the weakest point is, so you can tell which knots are better or worse. So just do some tests. Like, it doesn't take long, and you have the confidence now, right? Like now, like when you're fishing, you know, per your own test, that you're using the best knot. And that, for me, I was doing tournaments where money was on the line. I never once tested my knots, not once. I would just go with the ones that I heard from friends or from people on TV or in magazines that were the best. And I was blown away when I actually started testing them. Like my knot strength, my overall line strength literally went up by over 20% simply from doing some tests. In my case, it was the FG knot going from the double uni to the FG. But again, maybe your line might be a little bit different. I don't know. So far, the FG has been working on a lot of them, but just test it. And that way, you know. And even if you want to get next level, if you're fishing around structure a lot, it is smart to actually purposefully make sure that the knot to your lure is just barely weaker than your line to braid, so that when you do get snagged, because it's going to happen, right? You're going to get snagged. There could be some rocks or something under the dock. And when you break off, you don't want to lose your whole leader, right? You don't want your line, first of all, it's a pain to retie, but also you don't want to have this line in the water, right? You don't want to just leave anything more than the bare necessities. So when you do break off, this is going to break, you get all your leader back, and now you can quickly tie another lure and be back in action really fast. So you don't know exactly what the weakest point is until you test it out. And I have to imagine that maybe like 2% of anglers actually have tested out their knots. I know for experience, I never did it for a long time. Even when I had money on the line, I don't know many other people who have actually done it. It doesn't take long, but it has a significant upside because you know exactly what's happening. I used to think that if there wasn't a curly tail at the end of the line, that means that just my line broke and it wasn't the knot. That's not true at all. And I've done almost all the knot contests. The breaking point, when I analyze the end result of the line, there's not a curlicue. The curlicue shows that there's a terrible knot because it slipped. But most knots, the breaking point will happen at the very first turn of the line, and it'll come out nice and straight, just like it looked like a fish chopped through it, but that was actually the knot breaking. And if you don't have the other side to examine, you have no idea. So just doing some tests has some huge upside and just hardly takes any time at all.
You are the weakest link. So another question that comes up is, how often do you change out your leaders? For instance, let's say the average weekend warrior fishes twice a month. So goes fishing, obviously rinses the stuff off. Do you change it out on the next trip, or do you let it run, assuming there's no nicks and you hadn't had snook or ladyfish or anything mess with it? You guys let it keep going, or do you try to replace it?
Let it ride. As long as it doesn't have any nicks or it looks clear and like it looks good, no sense on redoing it, I think. If it was a tournament, I would probably redo it, but just for normal fishing, I don't retie them.
Yeah, I agree. If there's no little stringy pieces hanging off of it that shows abrasion or no nicks or nothing, I'll go with it. Another thing to look out, Luke just said it, but he kind of passed over it real fast. If it looks clear. So I've had leader that's gone bad, I guess, because I left it in an area that it got a lot of sun. Maybe I left my rods in my car for a few days or something, and that sun beat down on that leader. It'll get kind of cloudy, and I find it's more brittle, easier to break. Look at it and make sure that it's clear. If you see any kind of cloudiness to it, change it. I'd say if you keep it in I think the sun is what does that. Luke, I don't know if you know the answer, but if it's clear, it's good. I would say just put it in a closet, once you clean your rods off and everything, it should keep those leaders good for several trips.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just storage wise is keep it in like an air controlled environment. Don't put it in the garage. Don't put it in the shed. Don't leave it anywhere where the temperature is going up and down and there's a lot of humidity, and especially if there's salt in the air. Like if you're right near your bay, like our dad keeps his stuff in the garage at a condo down there, and his line just gets so brittle so fast. And no matter how much I tell him, it's convenient, right? It's super convenient, so he does it. But it is horrible for lines. It's bad for reels too. So just taking a little, I ended up making these little rod racks. Personally, it was kind of fun. So now I can keep them inside, and it doesn't look too terrible. But just keeping it inside is a significant advantage for both the line and the reel and the rods, really for everything.
Yep. And that one book, the Scientific Angler, talk about, it was mono in particular, that was because at the time I don't think the fluoro was around, but mono was absorbing chemicals like gasoline. Like if you kept it in a shed where you kept your lawnmower and weed whackers and all that stuff with some gasoline tanks, that it was actually getting in there and hurting your chances of catching fish. So you definitely want to keep that your lines inside in a safe place, away from any kind of chemicals or paints or anything like that. That was really interesting. So cool. Well, anything else, guys, before we, why you got one more?
Yeah, I would say, I know we were talking about the FG knot, but if we didn't touch on a big mistake with the FG knot, because it's a line leader knot. I had a lot of people talk about their lines slipping when they made casts with the FG. And I had a similar experience to it when I first started tying that knot. And one of the big things when you do your leader and you do that knot, Luke did a great video on the FG knot mistakes. The biggest thing that I found I wasn't doing was, after I made those 2 half hitches, you make those 20 or so turns on your line, make sure you evenly apply pressure to both the leader and the main line. If you don't do that, those coils won't lock in. You'll actually see them change color. And if they don't do that, you don't have a strong enough line. I found the number one time I'd have an FG knot slip, quotations, because it wasn't even tied right, was when I went to cast and my lure was skimming across the water, and it put a ton of tension on that FG. And I don't know if it would slip or that one coil would get too much tension on it, but it would almost always break when that would happen. It would get dragged from the water as I was casting. So I think we'd be wrong if we didn't have a leader mistake podcast and didn't talk about the number one mistake with FG knots.
That's good.
So I just wanted to add that one in there.
That's good. Cool, guys. Well, hopefully you found this helpful. And if you do need any kind of materials for leaders and all your terminal tackle, rods, reels, line, slam, shadies, power prawns, etc., all there at fishstrong.com. Of course, Insider members get 20% off or more on all of your orders. And if you haven't noticed, for you insiders, we've been putting out an insider report every single weekday, Monday through Friday, new on the water report. And doggone, I'm thoroughly enjoying them and learning so much. I don't think anything can replace on the water footage of seeing someone in a boat or a kayak or wade fishing, like actually go fish a real spot, and not just fishing it, but doing the pre-trip planning and even post-trip analysis of why they picked that spot and what happened and what pivots do they have to make. So that's the real world, right? Very rarely do you just pre-trip plan from the comfort of your home and it's 100% perfect. Obviously, you're trying to get it as clean as possible, but you have to make pivots. It's part of life. I mean, part of anything, any kind of sporting event, you always go in with a game plan, and sometimes you got to pivot a little bit based on what the opponent, in our case, the fish, are doing. But man, it just gives you such a leg up that when you do go fishing, especially if you're a weekend warrior or a beginner, or even guys like Crazy Alberto who joined that just want to have a little bit of leg up and have some camaraderie and a great network of people to share and ask questions with, definitely come join us in the Insider Club. And of course, you can justify the cost by just all the cost savings on your tackle and by us telling you what not to buy based on our own test. I save hundreds of dollars just on avoiding the stuff I shouldn't be buying, let alone my 20% off, because Luke and I and Wyatt, we're all insiders yourself. We get the same discounts you guys do. So hope you'll join us. We're over 27,000 members there, and that's all at saltstrong.com. Guys, anything else to add? This was a fun one. We'll do more, and maybe we'll do a mainline mistakes. A lot of issues happening there, the same ones that we all made when we first started fishing.
Yeah, I think line is the most overlooked part of fishing. Everybody, hey, what rod you catch on? What reel? Actually, what reel most of all? What reel? And line is line's more important than reel, in my opinion. At least for the most part, as far as catching fish. So I think that'd be a really good topic.
Cool. We'll do it. All right, guys, we appreciate you. This will be over at saltstrong.com in the fishing tip section. If you want to ask us any questions or anything we forgot, if there's anything that you really want to get specific with, leave us a comment. We'll do our best to answer it over there at saltstrong.com in the fishing tip section. At the very bottom of every single post, you'll see a place to leave a question. It comes right to us. Boo bam sham. So appreciate you guys. If you're listening on iTunes, leave us a review. That helps us out big time to get found in that whole algorithm. And it's how we keep this entire podcast ad free. So we do not have any ads, and we like to keep it that way. And all we ask is that you give us reviews and share it with a friend. That means the world to us. And man, it just makes you feel all warm and fuzzy after you do it. So please do share it. Otherwise, we'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Peace. We out. Woo, woo.